AstroAccess, May 11, 2024. Update from the MicroGravity Zone. What we know about disability and zero gravity. Dr. Sheri Jensen.
Awesome. That was such a fantastic talk, Maria. Thank you so much. Expect an email because I really want to, we all need to talk. And that's one of the points that I want to make and remake is it is fantastic for ESA to be doing what they're doing and fantastic for NASA to be doing what they're doing. And I'm grateful for what we're doing. But if we're all doing it separately, we will duplicate work. And honestly, we don't have time and energy to duplicate work. We need to be working together in lockstep. And I'm so excited to talk with you later. So thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I wrote down a million things. And thank you to the team at AstroAccess who made all this possible, for all my colleagues that I've been working with for, I don't know, forever, it feels like, but not that many years. And I think I want to just jump in and say that I'm not going to spend time re-asking the question about if disabled people should go to space. 1 in 4 folks on the planet are disabled. So as more people go, it's going to just become increasingly ridiculous that we're not there. So it's going to happen. And I'm also not going to ask why disabled people should go to space. There are ethical, economic, efficiency, and practical reasons why it is a good idea for disabled people to be where everyone else is. As we've heard in the chat a lot, there's still barriers on Earth. We just need, if we're going to move into space, we can do new things, as our keynote yesterday said too. We're doing new things now. We don't need to focus on doing the old things again. So I'm here to talk about sort of the state of the research as we understand it, and for some suggestions for organizing the road ahead. Hit the next slide, please. So this briefly is the history of the astronaut corps, the deep history in the United States. This is a picture of the Mercury 7, America's first astronauts. They're looking very fine. They're also looking very white and very male and very non-disabled. The next slide, please. This is the newest astronaut class from NASA. You can see that there's definitely more gender and ethnic diversity, but there are still no disabled people on this list, in this picture. And this is odd because space is a disabling environment. Again, casting your mind back to Ashley's presentation, Ashley's keynote yesterday, it's going to happen. We might not send disabled people into space, but space will disable many of the people who go there. This is going to happen. We can either be prepared for it or not prepared for it. Next slide, please. In fact, space is already slowly becoming integrated. It's happening quietly. It's happening without permission. It's happening because it's such a natural process. This is a partial list, and only a partial list, of well-documented physical and psychological circumstances for people in space. We have had people, and some of these are acquired before flight, and some of them, it's a little bit of a complicated list because it contains sort of injuries and illnesses mixed with disabilities, which is something that by rights should be sorted out more carefully. You can't treat those as the same thing because, as you know, when you become injured or when you get sick, you don't have training for that. You are just sidelined by something. As you know, you're not your best when you have a wretched cold. And that's not the same as having a disability, right? So this list has conflated those situations, and it shouldn't, but that's a situation for a longer talk. Some of these disabilities have been in space for about 3 minutes on a suborbital flight, some for as long as a year on the International Space Station. And we haven't sorted that out between these lists, and that is, again, work that should be done more carefully. So we've had folks with artificial femurs, advanced arthritis, early stage Parkinson's disease, moderate hearing loss, muscle weakness, moderate vision loss, chills and fever and backache. Those are all things, and urinary tract infections. Those are all things, illnesses that were in space. As Maria said, ADHD, and there's been at least 2, probably more, folks with ADHD in space. And depression of various sorts, and most probably severe depression. So AstroAccess, as you guys probably already know, is a nonprofit dedicated to making space accessible. And one of the things that Sheila talked about briefly was one of the things that we've done about that. One of the ways that we've begun to investigate accessibility in space is with zero-G parabolic flights. And I think I also need to say that this is not just a matter, and I think Maria said this really well also, this is not just a matter of, oh, let's convince a few administrators to change a couple rules and then we're good to go. If it were like that, then I'd be a lobbyist and I wouldn't be talking to scientists all the time, and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be marching on Washington or something like that. It's not just about regulations, although regulations are involved. It's about data. What do disabled people need? Get the next slide for me, please. So, as I said, one of the things that, oh, sorry, Kitty, no. One of the things that that we talked about before is that AstroAccess is testing one of the variables about space, which is microgravity. And we've flown a bunch of people in zero gravity on parabolic flights. And this is a list of disabilities that we have flown: ADHD, blind folks with various levels of vision, deaf folks, people with one or more prosthetic limbs, and wheelchair users. Everybody, by the way, at the end of these zero gravity flights had about 3 minutes of zero gravity, and that is just about as much as you would get for in a suborbital flight. This is a good start. And we've learned a lot, and we'll talk about what we've learned in a second, but it really is time for us to get serious and systematic. We need to know two things about the circumstances for disabled people in flight at each stage. We need to have an accurate assessment of safety. And again, I want to thank Maria for pointing out that this means different things for different kinds of disabilities. And what we want to know is going to space going to do you harm? That seems to be something that is getting more attention than the other aspect, which is access, the second one. So what we want to know is if you can get to space and you can get there without harming your body in ways that you don't want to harm your body, because people take risks going to space. It's how it is. But once you get there, can you do your job? Depending on what your job is. If your job is to be a tourist, can you be a happy tourist? Is the space habitat going to be accessible enough for you to do that? If you are the commander, do you have access to everything you need to command your crew? And again, we're talking about testing these things at the analog level first. But anyway, so how are you going to do this? One of the things you could do is you could make the world's largest, most tedious, toxically boring spreadsheets with, say, all the disabilities and all the combinations across the top, and every single blasted thing you can think of that needs to get done on a space voyage or to live in space along the left-hand column. This spreadsheet, I can't even tell you how big this spreadsheet would be. I don't even have I can't even make up a probable evasion about how big this spreadsheet would be. It's going to be enormous, right? And so this is not something that's ever going to get funded. If you put the things on the left-hand side and the disabilities across the right, filling in all those little squares that comprise the body of the spreadsheet, no one is going to fund that. It's a super daunting task, and it would probably take forever. So what we need to look at is a way of organizing what we need to find out, finding out the things we need to find out, what we need to get done for sure. There's a couple different ways of organizing the work ahead of us. This is one system that we have come up with. There are others. And again, I think talking about how to organize the research is something that we need to talk about, along with talking about what research to do, right? So the next slide, please. What we've done here, partly just for the sake of argument, is divide the space experience into 3 sections. So the start, which involves training. Sorry. I'm throwing my kitty off my desk. Great. Training, which involves training. And we've grouped launch and sort of the start of the space experience, which is training and launch. And we've grouped re-entry with launch, since some of the variables are the same. The stay, which is your duration of time in space. the stop, which is off nominal landings. And we'll consider each of these categories in terms of safety and access, and then we would talk about disabilities in each case. So next slide, please. We're going to talk about training briefly. First, we can fly through this pretty quickly. There are two aspects of training. First is sort of before we launch kinds of training, which is lab work and book learning, basically. What do you need to know? What the things that you need to acquire knowledge-wise? We know we can do this. Again, the STEM fields are not as accessible as they should be, but we know that this is work that's already ongoing on Earth, so we're not reinventing any new wheels here. The picture is Mona Minkara, who flew on a couple zero-G flights with us, who is a chemist and is blind, and she's working in her lab looking cool. The next slide, please. Number 8 is the more training, and Maria talked a little bit about the physical aspects of training. And this is a picture. These are basically for team building and emergency and rescue training. This part of training can be very physical. Things like, I don't know, people have suggested things like skydiving, and they do things with water rescue. And again, this sort of work is ongoing on Earth as well. Athletes and disabled athletes and other folks who are nature lovers, who want to go out and do things outside, are exactly the source of information that we need for these things. And, and again, I just want to ask, we need to ask the question out loud, is all of this necessary? Certainly some of it is necessary, but do we need to do, for example, Arctic training in order for people to fly in space? I think that just because we have done a thing doesn't mean we have to keep doing it. If it serves a purpose, let's make it accessible. If it does not serve a purpose, then maybe we need to rethink it. And the slide here is a picture of the famous picture. We've started to call this the famous picture because it is one I use on lots of slides, of Eric Shear and our friend Sheila there underwater at the SAM habitat wearing scuba suits. Let's see. Next slide, please. We're talking about launch and re-entry. The picture here is Eric Ingram with his marvelous blue hair, working on strapping himself into his with a 5-point harness so he could be safe during launch and re-entry. The thing with launch and re-entry is largely, the safety issue is largely, can your body withstand the G forces of launch and re-entry? And that's just a practical question. Can you or can you not? We don't have mechanisms right now for smoothing the G forces that you need to launch. Launch right now is launch. So can you be safe during that? Can we design couches to better support you? We know that on Inspiration 4, they did modify the couch for Haley Arsenault so that her leg could be comfortable and safe and supported during launch. So stuff can be changed. Access during launch and reentry depends on your job. If you are a scientist or a tourist, your job during launch is to sit there and behave yourself. Stay strapped in, don't cause trouble, right? Just sit there. So access is not a problem for most people during launch, but then you might think about what you might want during launch. Do you want to know what level, how high the spaceship is and how fast is it going? That's cool stuff to know. Maybe optional for a tourist to know that, but interesting. And you have to be alerted to any emergency procedures you might want to do during launch and reentry also. But if you are the pilot or if you are the co-pilot, then your access issues are going to be different. So it's not just access, it's access to your particular job. Slide 10, please. So the stay in microgravity or in outer space is maybe the one that we want to focus on the most. Right now, we're talking about life in 0G since we don't have a habitat on the moon quite yet, and we don't spin our space vessels quite yet, our space habitats in Earth orbit quite yet. So we're talking about 0G. Other stressors, which could be super important to disabled people, there are important, just like everybody else. Things like radiation, exposure, isolation, distance from Earth, and the problems with the closed environment will all come into play later. But right now, mostly what we're talking about is access to 0G. And here you see one of the AstroAccess flyers, CC, floating around looking awesome and looking like a boss in zero gravity. CC is a wheelchair user. So some accommodations that we know about and things that we're working on. So Sheila talked about this in the analog presentation, the need for accurate signaling and communication. We know, as Sheila said, that ASL works just fine in zero gravity, even when one of y'all is, quote, upside down. And we're working on systems for communication. We do need visual as well as voice communication to the ground. And we haven't sorted all that out yet on the technical side, but we know it can be done. For blind folk, we're looking at things like wayfinding. One of the good things about gravity is it gives you information about one of the directions, one of the variables in a three-dimensional space. If you always know where down is, at least you've got that going on. But we suspected, and we found to be true, that in a microgravity environment, the situation for finding your way around if you can't see becomes a little bit more complicated. It's not doable. It is doable, but it's going to be more complicated. So we're looking at things like, can we have some frequently available tactile signage so that you know where you are in relationship to the room around you as long as you are at a wall? Or then maybe the next iteration of that will be tactile representations and information available to you on handrails. And this again is useful for everyone in a suddenly dark environment or an environment where there's dust in the air or smoke in the air. Hopefully that won't occur, but it has happened at least once or twice aboard the International Space Station. So again, this system would be valuable for everyone who takes time to learn it. The other sort of situation for blind flyers, and we're talking about flyers with very little light perception, is quote, dropped objects. If you drop an object on Earth, it helpfully falls to the floor. It makes a noise. And so again, it's possible to isolate where the object probably is and then go find it. I mean, if sometimes they roll away on you and things like that, but you have a good idea of where to start. If you, quote, drop an object in zero gravity and you start searching for it with your hand, it's possible that you will knock it away from yourself. The first contact with your hand will push it away. When I had this conversation with Katie Coleman, who is one of the astronauts that's been a marvelous supporter of AstroAccess, and I said, well, Katie, what do you do if you have an object and it floats away from you and it's not tethered to you? And her immediate answer to me was, well, why isn't it tethered to you? My goodness, keep things tethered, which is a fair response, I think. But you can't do things like tether the food you're eating. You are going to have to interact with some objects that you can't keep tethered all the time. So what is a good mechanism for that? And how do I find a thing? How do I find my tool as a blind person if it floats away from me a little bit? We've talked about people with lower limb differences or paralysis. Having a tether to hook your legs together is useful. We're working on a system with Corey McClellan, one of our flight ops leads, working on a system of, quote, space furniture, useful for everyone. If you cannot hook a toe around a bar and hold yourself in place like that, which folks with paralysis won't be able to do, what is another good way of keeping your body in place while your hands are busy doing a task? We're talking about maybe some slightly stiffer tethers with maybe some Velcro or other ways of attaching yourself to your work area so that you can do your job. Let's see. Next slide, please. This is the stop, the off-nominal landing. This gets a lot of attention. And again, you want to be able to evacuate folks when there's an emergency. Just for what it's worth, we know that we've seen studies of, for example, blind people evacuating an airplane. The FAA did a study back in the 1980s of loaded a bunch of blind folks onto a plane and said, okay, y'all, it's an emergency, get out through the overwing exit doors. And I'm still looking for pictures of this, but apparently all the blind people got out in record time faster than sighted people did. Interestingly, I don't know why that is. And there's one picture that exists apparently of some guy like giving his dog guide a big hug, grabbing him up in his arms and jumping out of the plane onto the slide with doggy in arms. Again, love to have that picture. I think that would be marvelous. So the question of evacuation becomes, how do you evacuate a bus? The keynote, Chris in the keynote yesterday talked about we want going to space to be like getting on a bus. So we don't have to keep talking for very much longer about evacuating a small capsule that you have to crawl through a hatch to get out of or to get into, right? Pretty soon we're going to be talking about evacuating a bus or evacuating an airplane, which is a different technical and interpersonal problem than evacuating a capsule. So again, we want to be aware of the circumstances of off-nominal landings, but those are going to be changing rapidly. The next slide, please. This is your obligatory slide of Stephen Hawking looking very pleased with himself, floating in zero gravity aboard, by the way, with the same company, and it was the same airplane, I think, that we used for our zero-G flights. And I think it's necessary to say here that the question is not how do we fly everybody. What we want to do is widen the aperture. We want to make sure that more people are able to fly. So we still have to think about, for example, people who are currently infected with something contagious. Those people should not fly to space for the safety and well-being of other people who are already in space. People who are recently injured probably are not good candidates to fly to space. Because they would be differentially affected perhaps by the G-forces of liftoff. Also, they don't have training to deal with your disability. If you're watching someone with a broken leg trying to get around on crutches or in a wheelchair, they are maybe 100th as cool and efficient as a person who is in a wheelchair who has those skills. So newly injured people, perhaps, again, we should think about not flying those folks. And then we have to think about people whose bodies cannot withstand the forces of launch. We don't want to injure anybody in ways, we just don't want to hurt, we don't want to hurt anybody, right? So we're talking about flying more folks, and we don't want the industry in particular to get the idea that if you can't fly everybody, you shouldn't fly anybody, right? So we need to gradually, incrementally open the way for more folks. Slide 13, please. Couple principles that we have arrived at in our research that seem to be working and seem to be important is that all of this research must be disability-led. Disability inclusion is real nice, but if there are choices being made and agenda being set while the disabled people are in the other rooms suiting up, that's not good. We need representation and participation and leadership at all levels where choices are being made about our inclusion, nothing about us without us. So we need to, which means that we have, as disabled folk, we have the responsibility of helping to recruit more disabled people into the STEM fields so that there are more disabled people ready to take on those leadership roles. Right now, there are people there are people available, but we need more. Excuse me. So all of this work has to be disability-led. We need to think about systems of double informed consent. So not just informed consent that what will happen to you physically when you go into space, but also we need to inform people about what their access is going to be when they get there. So we're working on increasing access, but until it's perfect, and no surprise, it's probably never going to be perfect because access on Earth is not perfect. We need to know what the access is like so that we can tell people, yes, you can go into space. Yes, you can. This is not a question of permission, but here is the situation that you will be dealing with. We'll keep working to make it better, but we want to be clear with people when they go what their circumstances are going to be. We want to make sure that the research that we're doing is targeted. We don't want to just do anything that comes into people's heads. While it is true that any finding is a valuable finding at some level, we don't have tons of resources here and we don't have tons of time. So we have to make sure that the research that we are doing is stuff that needs doing, which again, disability-led will help eliminate some spurious research that we don't really need to do. And we don't want to duplicate effort, right? We want to make sure that we know what each other is doing and share resources, which is our fourth principle is that we want to make sure that we're sharing information. And there's a couple URLs here. One is astroaccess.org/research, which is not quite happening yet. We also have disabilityinspace.org. And the idea is going to be that we will have both a gathering of useful articles on disability in space that have research findings so that people can find those and do a decent literature review. Right now, when you try to do a literature review, I can tell you from personal sad experience, when you try to do a literature review on disability in space, you get lots and lots of articles and news articles about how I'm going to be the first person with disability X in space. And you get, those are all great. But they're kind of noise in the signal when you're really looking for research, that you need to do. So we're hoping to sort of clear the way for that. Next slide, please. This, my friends, is the future of astronaut classes in the world. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is what it will look like if we have the strength to keep going, and if we encourage one another and work together. This is a picture of the flyers from AstroAccess Flight 1. We are all standing on the tarmac wearing our flight suits, looking amazingly excited about what's about to happen to us. Except for me, I'm probably looking scared. It is a mixture of gender and ethnically diverse group of folks, and you can identify all different kinds of disabilities within this group. Heads up also that we also need to be thinking about non-apparent disabilities like ADHD when we're talking about access here, even though you can't see that in that picture, it was there, and we want to make sure that we continue to acknowledge that. My last slide here is that's what the people should look like, and this is what the industry should look like. I cannot tell you how much I love this picture because it means that this means access right here, and it is a picture of the 727. Thank you to the Zero G Corporation for ceaseless and a marvelous support for our projects and for willingness to be playful and brave and smart and go on this adventure with us. This is a picture of their airplane with its cargo door, which is usually closed, its big cargo door in the middle of the plane wide open, and a great, big, gorgeous, graceful wheelchair ramp going down from that cargo door to the tarmac to welcome aboard anyone who wants to go onto that plane. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you so much. And again, really the most important thing we can do right now, besides magically find money, but the most important thing that we can do is make sure that we are 100% sharing our resources and sharing our information so that we don't duplicate effort. Thanks, everybody, and so glad to take questions.
Thank you so much, Sheri. At this time, we welcome everyone to submit questions via the Q&A. We already have quite a few in here for you. First one from Adrian. How might you see this research being applied to train astronauts to manage a disability that occurs in space on a long duration deep space mission such as Mars?
That's a perfect question, and that's a slide that I usually have in here. It's a good question. So first off, there are sort of three aspects to acquiring a disability and going back to work, right? One is your environment accessible? A stuff in place where you need it. So if you lose vision, is there a computer with a screen reader in place? So again, if we know what we're doing and we make our environments accessible, then that can be, yes, we can do that. We have the technology, we have the smarts, we can make sure that those missions are that the habitats and the space vessels are accessible. The second aspect is that you need to learn the skills for a new disability, right? That's a lot of work. And the third aspect is your emotional changes in rethinking yourself from a capable, strong, competent, non-disabled person to a capable, strong, competent, disabled person. That's a kick in the head. It genuinely is. That's an emotional trip that you have to go on, and it's a lot of work. And so to do that, millions of miles away from home and millions of miles away from everything from support is going to be hard. So one of our things that we need to think about is what happens when that goes on. So do we have on every mission some kind of access officer who can not only be in charge of troubleshooting the technology, but also assisting a newly disabled person with that transition when they're far away from home? If we get more comfortable with the idea of disability existing alongside non-disability, that transition does not need to be as big a kick in the head as it is, right? We can take care of one another. So again, it's about putting things in place. Honestly, if there is already a disabled person on the crew, that person can talk the newly disabled person along, right? That person can be a mentor and can be help. It would be a lot to change your status like this, but we know it can happen, and so we have to be ready for it to happen. It might be a lot of contact with Earth, but as the distances get harder, that might be more difficult. So we might need to leave some interactive stuff make some interactive tech available on the vessel so that that person can work through some of it on their own. The other thing is that we just have to be honest with one another. Look, disability is going to happen in space. I think astronauts are already thinking, yeah, I might die there. But are they also thinking, yeah, I might lose my hearing there. Yeah, I might go blind there. Yeah, I might lose a leg there. And having at least that acknowledgement that it could happen, and talking about it openly and talking about how you would deal with it would get you part of the way there. That's a really good question.
Thank you. And we have just a bit more time for one more question from Axel. Hello again, Sheri. Another great talk. I 100% agree with your point of not doubling the work and using resources wisely. How would you recommend we coordinate on a daily basis the efforts that are made all around the world to advance the topic of accessible spaceflight? I will also be reaching out to you about the accessible analog topic if you don't mind.
Yes, please. And actually, that's exactly the research arm at AstroAccess is exactly, that's exactly what we're interested in doing next, because we cannot be isolated. So, we can start with a website. We can start with, last year we had a symposium. When I was the astrobiology chair at the Library of Congress, we had a symposium. We're working on number 2, symposium on disability and space. We're working on version 2 of that so that we can be in the same room, virtually or physically, and share our updates. And then also, once we establish that network of people doing this research, then we just be in touch so that we can post things and share with one another. It's super important, Axel, and I really want to talk to you.
SciAccess. Learn more at www.sciaccess.org.